Tam McGraw wasn't feared because of what he was convicted of. He was feared because nothing ever stuck to him. In a city where men were jailed, stabbed, or burned alive for far less, his name stopped conversations cold. Police watched him for years. Rivals whispered about him. Associates went to prison. McGraw didn't. No murders pinned on him. No life sentence. Yet people believed touching him meant death. This wasn't a myth built on headlines. It was built on silence, fear, and the unsettling question nobody could answer. How does one man stay this close to violence and never pay for it? In Glasgow's Underworld, Tam McGraw was feared, but not convicted. That contradiction is where the story begins. While others filled court docks and prison wings, Tam McGraw kept walking out the front door. No life sentence, no murder conviction, no headline verdict that explained the fear his name carried. Yet rooms went quiet when it was mentioned. Conversations stopped. People looked away. They called him the licensee. Not because of a pub, because it sounded like permission, an unspoken belief that he operated under rules that didn't apply to anyone else. This was a city shaped by silence. In the schemes and back streets of Glasgow, reputation mattered more than paperwork. Men didn't need convictions to be powerful. They needed witnesses who wouldn't talk, victims who wouldn't testify, and a trail that never quite reached a courtroom standard. Police knew the name. Files thickened. Surveillance followed. Associates were arrested. Some went to prison for years. McGraw DIDN, single quotes T. Each acquittal hardened the myth. Each failed case fed a darker suspicion that he wasn't just careful, but untouchable. Journalists wrote around him. Detectives watched him. Rivals feared him. The question lingered, unanswered and unsettling. How does one man stay at the center of so much and never get caught? By the end of the 1990s, police believed they finally had him. But what happened next stunned everyone. Tam McGraw was born in 1952 in Lennoxtown, a small Stirlingshire town far removed from the violence that would later define his reputation. But Glasgow was never far. As he moved into the city's orbit, he entered a criminal landscape already shifting beneath his feet. By the 1970s, Glasgow was changing fast. The old razor gangs were fading, replaced by organized crews chasing bigger money-armed robberies, protection rackets, and increasingly drugs. It was an era where proximity mattered. You didn't need to lead. You needed to be present when decisions were made. McGraw was present. Police intelligence and later reporting placed him around robbery crews and serious offenders during this period. Post office raids, armed jobs, names that would later appear in court records and prison registers. Again and again, associates were convicted. Again and again, McGraw was not. This was the pattern that quietly took hold. He wasn't loud. He didn't cultivate celebrity. There were no public feuds, no flashy displays, no tabloid photographs splashed across front pages. His reputation spread another way through outcomes, through who went down and who didn't. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, detectives began to recognize the shape of it. McGraw's name surfaced in briefings and surveillance logs, not charges. He appeared at the edges of serious crime scenes, never quite close enough for prosecutors to close the distance. On the streets, that mattered more than bravado. People noticed who avoided jail. They noticed who stayed calm when others panicked. Over time, that restraint became its own form of intimidation. Nothing had been proven. Nothing dramatic had happened, but something was forming at the same time. Glasgow erupted into open warfare, and McGraw's name kept surfacing. The ice cream wars tore through Glasgow in the 1980s, transforming something mundane into a violent battleground. Ice cream vans became mobile cash machines. Territory meant profit, and intimidation became the language of control. Arson attacks, threats, and murders followed, often in broad daylight, while entire neighborhoods learned to stay silent. It was the most violent period the city had seen in decades. During this era, Tam McGraw was reported in media accounts and later named by journalists as a figure connected to people operating within that world. Not charged, not convicted, but discussed again and again in the same breath as men who were. Documentaries and crime writers would later place McGraw on the periphery of the conflict, linked in media to individuals involved in intimidation and rackets tied to the ice cream trade. The wording always mattered. He was associated, connected, named, never formally accused in court of ordering or committing the killings that defined the war. That distinction is crucial. But on the streets, distinctions blurred. Reputation didn't come from verdicts. It came from survival. As others were jailed or killed, McGraw remained free. And in a city watching bodies pulled from burned-out shops and doorsteps, that fact spoke volumes. Fear did the rest. Witnesses didn't talk. Victims withdrew statements. Whole communities closed ranks, not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. Police investigations stalled in the same way, over and over again, not because violence was hidden, but because no one would confirm what everyone already believed. This was the environment that amplified McGraw's myth. Not as a trigger man, not as a visible leader, but as someone whose name endured while chaos consumed others. By the end of the ice cream wars, Glasgow was exhausted. The violence faded, but the networks remained. And the men who survived that era carried their reputations forward, quietly, carefully, and more powerful than before. For McGraw, the war didn't end his story. It sharpened it. But the moment police thought they could finally prove it, all came years later, with drugs, not murders done by the late 1990s. Police believed they had finally closed the distance on Tam McGraw. Years of intelligence gathering had narrowed to a single point: drugs, not rumors, not associations. A prosecution built on scale, money, and movement. The investigation was extensive: surveillance, financial analysis, phone traffic, a network of co-accused whose roles were clearer and whose exposure was greater. The Crown's theory was straightforward. This was not small-time dealing, but organized supply at a level that demanded coordination and leadership. For detectives who had watched McGraw orbit major crime for decades, this was the moment everything converged. The courtroom atmosphere reflected that belief. Expectations were high. Reporters filled benches. Officers who had worked the case sat quietly, confident that the paper trail would finally do what witnesses never had. The seriousness of the charges alone suggested consequences measured in years, perhaps decades. Then the verdicts came. McGraw was acquitted. Around him, others were convicted and sentenced. Men linked to the same investigation were led away to prison. The contrast was stark. The legal system had spoken, and it had drawn a line straight through the heart of the case, leaving McGraw on the outside once again. For police, the shock was visceral. Years of work ended without the one result they believed mattered most. For the Underworld, the message landed differently. It wasn't about evidence or procedure. It was about outcome, about who paid the price and who didn't. That acquittal hardened a narrative that had been forming for years. The idea that McGraw was not just careful, but untouchable. That prosecutions collapsed around him while others absorbed the fallout. That being close to him was dangerous, but being him was safe. Frustration turned into disbelief. Disbelief curdled into suspicion. Each failed attempt to jail him made the myth louder, not quieter. The nickname, the licensee, stopped sounding like a joke and started sounding like a warning. But power of that kind never exists in isolation. It breeds resentment. It attracts challengers. And it creates enemies willing to take risks courts never could. By 2002, someone decided the law wasn't enough and tried to kill him. In May 2002, the violence that had circled Tam McGraw for decades finally reached his doorstep. Near his home in Mount Vernon, Glasgow, McGraw was attacked and stabbed. Early reports were confused. Some claimed he was gravely injured, others that he had narrowly escaped death. What emerged later was more revealing than the wounds themselves. He had been wearing body armor. That single detail changed how the attack was understood. Body armor isn't worn by accident. It's worn by men who believe an attempt on their life is imminent. McGraw survived the assault, but survival wasn't the message that mattered. Expectation was. Someone had wanted him dead, and he knew it. Word traveled fast. To rivals, the attack proved he was no longer beyond reach. To associates, it confirmed the danger of standing too close. And to police, it signaled a shift from courtroom battles to something far less controllable. The following year, that instability deepened. In March 2003, a man widely reported as a close associate of McGraw was killed in a Glasgow pub. The attack was public, brutal, and unmistakably deliberate. Charges would later be brought, but the case collapsed. No conviction followed. As before, responsibility was never legally assigned. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Violence was now striking people around McGraw, not just rumors and intelligence files. The protective distance that had once defined his position was eroding. Fear intensified on all sides. Witnesses pulled back further. Conversations shortened. The environment became unpredictable, even for those accustomed to danger. This wasn't expansion. It was contraction. A world narrowing under pressure, not growing in confidence. McGraw remained free, but freedom looked different now. More guarded, more isolated. The quiet control that had sustained him for years was giving way to tension and uncertainty. Survival replaced influence as the priority. There were no public statements, no visible retaliation, just silence, heavy and deliberate. And then, just as suddenly as the violence had surged, the story refused to give anyone the ending they expected. No arrest, no final trial, no reckoning in court. The end came quietly. On the 30th of July 2007, Tam McGraw died at his home in Mount Vernon, Glasgow. He was 55 years old. The cause was reported as a heart attack. There were no sirens, no cordons, no last chase through the streets that had whispered his name for decades. And with his death came an absence that felt deliberate. No convictions for the crimes most often associated with him. No final trial to answer the questions that had followed him since the 1970s. No courtroom moment to separate fact from fear. What remained was the legend. For some, McGraw was a criminal mastermind who operated beyond the reach of the law. Proof that power doesn't always leave fingerprints. For others, he was a man whose reputation grew larger than reality, expanded by silence, rumor, and the city's need to explain violence it could never fully prosecute. Both views endure because the evidence never closed the gap. In Glasgow's Underworld, stories don't need verdicts to survive. They only need repetition. A name that outlasts arrests. A pattern that resists explanation. A man who never stood convicted, yet never stood unchallenged. McGraw didn't fall in court. He didn't rise in public. He simply remained until he was gone. Power without proof, fear without verdicts, and a silence that still refuses to explain itself. The events described in this video are based on publicly available information, court records, and news reports. All individuals mentioned are considered innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Some details are alleged or reported and are presented for informational and documentary purposes only.